there's a lot of little personality, psychological things you got to watch for, and really you're just keeping. Sometimes you're protecting the music from the artist. Like the artist is going to mangle the music in some way. Like their ideas their production ideas might overtake the music to a degree, and you got to say, hey, ease up, or they might try to do things too rigid when it should be looser.
Sure.
Click track, no click track, what kind of instrumentation, there's a lot of variables and a lot of decisions.
The Portland 50 podcast is brought to you by Jaguar Land Rover Portland. One company, two iconic brands. Jaguar Land Rover Portland is a Don Rasmussen company, the legendary Portland institution serving our community since 1950. Additional support for the Portland 50 is provided by Zupan's Markets. Our guest on this episode is Larry Crane. He's a recording engineer, he's been a bassist in a band, and he's the owner and founder of Portland's Jackpot recording studio, which is often called Portland's most important recording studio, seeing the likes of Sleater Kinney, The Decemberists, Jenny Lewis, M. Ward, REM, and many, many more. Larry is also the editor of Tape Op magazine. Back in 2003, he became the music catalog archivist for Elliott Smith following the singer's death. So how often do you travel? Are you traveling a lot, or are you in Portland most of the days?
I'm usually in Portland, but because of my work, because of Tape Op magazine, especially that I founded in 1996 here in Portland.
You actually founded that before you founded Jackpot Recording Studio.
Totally true. I started the magazine in 1996 and the studio in 1997, so about a year apart. But because of the magazine, the studio keeps me here. Yeah. And then the magazine takes me out of town. So I was just in Anaheim, California before this for the Winter NAMM show, which is a big music merchandisers conference. Like, I don't even know how many, 50, 100,000 people go to this thing. Yeah. And it's massive. And we go there, we sell advertising, and we look at products to review, and I talk with people about potential interviews that I'm going to do. And then I went to Chicago and interviewed Jeff Tweedy of Wilco. And I visited those guys at their loft place. I met up with all the Wilco guys. They actually happened to be in town, and most of them I already knew, which is kind of funny.
Do you ever, because if you look through your resume, the people that have been through Jackpot, the people that you've worked with one-on-one, are you kind of like, man, I can't believe I got to do that? Does that happen to you often?
All the time. Yeah. All the time. I mean, it's not even that massive of a fame level in some ways, but some of the clients that have come through that I haven't even met have included like Sonic Youth. Well, I've met Sonic Youth, but I haven't even recorded them. Yeah. Sonic Youth, REM, Eddie Vedder, people have come in to do sessions. The singer Matt Bellamy from Muse. Sure, yeah. All kinds of people have come through like on tour or to do demos or something. And that's amazing, but then the number that I've actually worked with as well in the studio is kind of crazy, Before we get too much into Jackpot, I think we should talk more about Tape Op, because since you started that first, but maybe we should start even further back from that. You're not originally from Portland. That's a good fact. I grew up in Northern California, not that far away, actually, and I was born in Berkeley, raised in Oakland, and then also raised in Nevada City, that area. Okay. A lot of tree. I remember the first time I visited Nevada City, and I'm like, wait, there's a city here? There's a city buried in the trees. Yeah, it's crazy. Beautiful. I mean, we've got similar things here, but my first time in Nevada City, I was just like, this is... If you lived in Nevada City, the Northwest is very comfortable to you. It feels very familiar. Yeah. And then I lived in Chico, California. I went to college there. And I started playing in a band with the wonderful moniker of Vomit Launch. Yeah, I've got it right here. Vomit Launch. You were the bassist? Yeah, I was the bassist, a co-songwriter with everybody. Who came up with the name? Do you remember that conversation? Yeah, I'll put the blame on someone. Do you know a record store in town called Exiled Records? Yeah. Okay, Lindsay from that store was our guitar player. Okay. And Lindsay Thrasher and a friend of ours, Doug, came up with the name. And we just picked the one that we thought was funniest of the list that they had one night. And, you couldn't regret that for 8 years. I don't know. I mean, having Vomit Launch on a resume is pretty awesome. And it's pretty rock and roll. It kind of fit the times. There were bands playing like the Butthole Surfers. Right. And Sonic Youth would be a good band name. They don't, the names were silly. Right. And we were like, what the hell, we're not going to become, famous. no one we know, no bands we ever play with are going to become famous. And then, you know, one day Nirvana opened for us, and you know,
wait, hold on. Nirvana opened for Vomit Launch.
They weren't even on the bill. They showed up, and we were opening for Mudhoney.
Yeah,
and just a 2-band bill, and this van pulls up, and we knew the roadie because he'd been in a band that had opened for us in Tacoma once. But yeah, so we were like, okay, sure. Actually, my bandmates were, because I'd gotten in an auto accident on the way to the gig. Anyway, but you know, before that, like, even we were coming up to the Northwest a lot.
Right.
We were having our records were being distributed through K Records in Olympia, Calvin Johnson's label. We had friends that were on Sub Pop before the Nirvana thing happened. And we just made some good friends in the Northwest, and so we would come up here and play, and we played Portland a lot with Cracker Bash, Calamity Jane, the Dharma Bums, all the local really awesome bands. We played shows with, met them, befriended them, would party with them, hang out. And so when our band broke up in '92, about 6 months later, Lindsay and I both moved up here.
Okay, so it wasn't the van breaking down in Portland, and you're just like, oh, let's just stay.
Oh, almost. It broke down in weed a couple of times. Yeah,
sure.
We didn't quite get home.
Okay, so but Portland had obviously made an impression on two of you, at least enough for you guys to both come back up here.
You know, Lindsay moved up first. We were just we've always been really good friends, and she moved up first and said, "Come visit." You know, I came to visit, and I'm like, "Yeah, we always had a good time on tour, and we even got stuck here once for like 4 days between gigs."
Right.
You know, I went to Powell's, I went to Ozone Records. I was like, this town's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so when time came to, you know, Chico's a small town, it's a college town. It's kind of like living in Eugene. It works for some people, and other people want to move on. You know,
need something a little bigger
after school.
Right.
Yeah. And so I was like, yeah, I could do this, and I came up here, and I was going to get out of the music world completely. That didn't work.
I think I read a quote from you once that basically said you didn't set out to be a recording engineer. You didn't set out to be a musician. You were just a fan of music, and it just kind of has steered the ship. Absolutely.
I mean, I think being a music fan was the first thing that really got me involved, and I kind of got into the technical end of it way early on. I had electronics courses in high school, and we would build these little boxes, and I kind of wanted to make bleepy noises and record them to cassette. So I figured out how to do some of that kind of stuff. And I bought some mics and recorded my friends that played, real instruments like guitars. That was early on. I was like 17, 18, and then like when I was 21, I was kind of making these solo cassettes. I was putting these things out that were kind of weird. And around 81 or 85, sorry. Actually, before that, like in the 82 probably, I started doing radio, college radio, and I'd already gotten a radio license that you had to have back then in high school. So I took a course.
I even had one of those.
Yeah, you don't have to have them now.
Not anymore. No, they put anybody on the radio.
Yeah,
I'm pointing to myself now.
But I got my little card. I took a course and I learned about radio and FCC stuff, and I learned not to say certain words and all those things. And I sat in on radio shows when I was a teenager, up in Nevada City. KVMR, really good station, public radio. And so I went to Chico, worked at the college radio station, became a music director, and then a DJ, of course. And then along the way, I started playing in a band with a couple of other DJs, Lindsay Thrasher and Patricia Rowland, now known as Patricia Howard.
Okay.
And so we started the band Vomit Launch, and then eventually got a great drummer from England named Steve Bragg, and we started just touring up and down the West Coast and stuff.
And then next thing you know, Nirvana's opening for you.
Yeah, next thing you know. And we headlined CBGB's on a Saturday, and the guy from Matador Records set that show up because he was a friend, and the Magnetic Fields opened. We had all kinds we played with like the Replacements, Dead Kennedys. I mean, it was kind of the time we were doing, the really good circuit, that when you read the history, like the history books, have written us out, but we were out right there alongside all these other bands like Husker Du and Replacements and all these wonderful bands that were going on back then.
So you make it to Portland after the band breaks up. What did you come here to do? And that was not going to be music focused.
I was gonna do electronics actually, and I went and worked in a place in Tigard for like 2 weeks, and I had to be there at 6 a.m. And believe me, going to see bands at Satyricon and then going out and soldering at 6 a.m. was really hard. I was getting pretty sleepy, and they just didn't pay that well. Honestly, there was a point where I said they were hiring me through a temp company, and they were gonna have me on. I asked someone, "What do you make?" And she goes, $850. And this is 25 years ago, but $850 for being there for 3 years and having a lot of responsibility.
Right.
I was like, "You're kidding me."
Yeah.
I went and started working for McMenamins, and I got paid far more.
Yeah.
Honestly, and I got some free hamburgers and pints of beer.
Right.
And I was treated better, And so I worked for them for about 3 years, and then my home studio that I accidentally started just started getting busy, and I had Stephen Malkmus, Cat Power, the Spinanes doing demos, all kinds of people. Bands would come through. I had a band from New Zealand and Canada.
How are they hearing about you? Because this is pre-internet, right?
Yeah, this is all my old connections from being in that band for so long. I also wrote for small zines and magazines, and so I would just I'd go see friends that I'd played with before, and they'd be like, "Oh my God, can we stay at your house?" Like, sure, and then, "Oh, you got a studio," so it kind of like,
And then word would get out.
Yeah,
when
totally.
you're in Portland, look up that Larry guy.
And we were on a label that was in DC
Yeah.
called Teen Beat, and he would send bands like Versus and stuff like, "Oh, you're going through Portland, I need a song for a compilation track. Can you knock it out?"
Oh.
Things like that.
Yeah.
Just sort of like just serendipitous to a degree, but also, as I found through doing all this, is like you don't just start with one goal in mind. You kind of like let it all focus in on what you're a good facilitator for.
Do you this was it in your basement, this home studio in your basement?
It was called Laundry Rules Recording because the previous tenants had written on the wall
the laundry rules
with Sharpie or something, the laundry rules, and they were all spelled wrong too, which was totally hilarious.
Sure. And so so that might not be officially called the start of Jackpot Records, but eventually
a recording studio. Yeah.
Recording studio.
Yeah, I know. Isaac and I. You should interview Isaac.
Keep it in the right
from
lane
Jackpot
here.
Records.
Yeah.
It really was kind of though. I mean, the only reason I changed the name was because there was a studio called Laundry Room in Seattle, where actually Dave Grohl did his first Foo Fighters record.
Okay.
There, or he worked with the guy that owned that. Actually, he did it at a different studio. But so that I knew that was starting to happen, that people get it confused and stuff. And I was like, oh. And then so I was looking for a commercial space, and another friend of mine, a mutual friend of mine, and Elliot Smith's, knew that we were both going to build studios like in the coming year, and said, "You need to talk." And we had a meeting, and I said, "I'm not going to get a partner," which it seems crazy to say no to working with Elliot Smith as a partner, but in a way it was really smart because his career was just diverging into other stuff. So he helped me build out this. We found a space in 22 years ago. We found a space in Southeast Portland and started building it out, put a wall in, and made the studio. He brought his gear down, and the idea was that he would work out of there kind of prorated, like whatever our rent and utilities cost. And since he was helping build it and put the gear in there, and we did, he was doing demos, I was helping him, and he's working up new ideas for his next record, which was going to be XO, his first major label record. Yeah.
So it was actually, if I understood that correctly, it was actually the recording studio. You wanted to a recording studio is what introduced you to Elliott Smith, this mutual friend, saying, "Hey, you were already friends with him."
Yeah. Excuse me. I'd never. Let's see. I had recorded him actually before that at my house. Yeah, my home studio. One day I was throwing a party, and Joanna Balmain and him were dating at the time. She plays with Stephen Malkmus in the Chicks now. And Joanna was at the party because we had all these mutual friends, and Elliot was at the party. And he said, "Hey," he's always really shy. He wasn't like
really outgoing.
"Look at me," And he's like, "Hey, could I look at your studio downstairs?" And then we go inside, and he's like, "Oh yeah, this okay," because he needed to do some overdubs for his Either Or album. And I was, his console had broken, like his mixing board, so he couldn't listen to his tape deck. And he had the same exact kind of reel-to-reel tape deck, like a little 8-track. And so he knew that his tapes would play at my place. And so he came over and we did the vocals for a song called Pictures of Me, which is a really fantastic orchestrated little song. And it was completely different. I'd only ever heard his first record, Roman Candle, and this was going to be his third solo record. outside of Heat Miser and the bands he was doing. So I was like, wow, this is like, this sounds like the Zombies or the Left Bank or something. And he's like, oh, you like that kind of music, and I just think we never really said like, oh, now we're friends, But
right, it just kind of just naturally happened.
Yeah, we definitely had the same vision of what kind of music we liked and stuff. And even when we moved into the studio space, he's like, well, it might be hard to record me because I've bumped heads with people before. And I was like, I never bumped heads with him ever in the studio. I was just facilitating his vision because he knew what he wanted. You didn't have to say like, oh, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
Now I have to guide people and I'm usually older than most of the people I record and I got more experience and I go, oh, let me help you with this,
Right.
But with Elliot, you just kind of put the mic up and go, okay, the magic was already done, written,
sure,
ready to go.
I think that's one of the things that we often forget about when it comes to the finished product from a band or an artist is when they're in that recording studio, exactly what role does the producer actually do, whether they are full on kind of steering the ship or if they're just there to...
It can be anything.
Yeah.
That's the fascinating thing. That's why you can also have a magazine and write about it for 23 years.
Right.
Is because it's a completely changing target all the time. What I do in the studio is dependent on what the person brings in and what they want. And so I have sessions where I have to just like kind of manhandle it, like really like pull everybody in and sit them down and go, man, this is a mess. Like, how are you playing this part? And I have to be an arranger, and a counselor. And
are some people open to that, or what is it? It probably depends on who you're talking to.
Absolutely. Some people don't need it.
Right.
That's the other case is you have other ones where you just kind of like record it and gently suggest a few little tiny ideas, and it's good because it was there already.
Yeah.
It's like focusing a lens. It's like you don't focus when it's already in focus. You leave it alone. So I try to play. I mean, especially back then when I first started, I was very hands off. I would just record, and someone might go, "Am I flat?" And I'd go,
"Right,
I don't know. It's recorded." And now I'm really more outgoing about that. I'll be really, I'll form an opinion,
sure,
and I'll form an opinion, and I'll jump in and go, "Hey, that section there, let's retrack it. You could do it better." So, but you really need to be good at this. You have to be like a room reader, you have to walk in the room,
right?
And maybe it's some pre-production, maybe it's even just emails and phone calls or have a band visit the studio and kind of suss it out. But you just have to set up for success,
Right, and you're gauging personalities in there, who's going to be kind of take charge, who might not be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then if someone is really quiet, then you kind of keep an eye on them and make sure, because they might have like one amazing idea that the other people are tromping over. There's a lot of little personality, psychological things you got to watch for, and really you're just sometimes you're protecting the music from the artist, like the artist is going to mangle the music in some way, like
right.
Their production ideas might overtake the music to a degree, and you got to say, hey, ease up, or they might try to do things too rigid when it should be looser.
Sure.
Click track, no click track, what kind of instrumentation, there's a lot of variables and a lot of decisions.
And is this stuff you've just learned over the years? Because again, you didn't set out to do this, but you found yourself in it.
It's always an interesting thought, but I really feel like I had the producer skills long before I had the technological skills.
Okay.
And then because the reason being is that I knew what I liked about lots of records as a music fan. I would say, I don't like the sound of that record, but the songs are great. And I would have opinions, And I wrote, as a critic, reviews of a lot of underground releases and stuff where their budgets are small, you know? So I'd be like, wow, that's really good for a homemade record or what have you. I just think that, you build up skill over time too. And so like, say you'd get to the mixing stage, you weren't if I say I was early on, I was recording somebody and they were just throwing tracks down and I was going, okay. And then mixing was really hard. I couldn't get everything to fit. Like it's too dense or things are clashing in the same frequency range. Then I'd go, oh, okay, keep that in mind. Next session, hey, play that guitar part up higher so that, there's a guitars at 3 different frequencies instead of 1.
Sure.
And then you have this kind of mixing landscape to work with. It's more open, and then all the sounds can be heard, and then the band doesn't cry.
Right.
So
and that's probably as I tried to get us to this conversation or this topic early on. That's where tape op came out. Is basically the things you're talking about,
thinking about, talking about.
Yeah. So this is for industry folk, people that are in the recording. Maybe not necessarily industry folk, but
I would say
people that are interested in recording in studios.
Even if you like an artist a lot, I mean, we're trying to. We have this in Barnes and Noble. I mean, we have about 45,000 readers of the print edition, 75,000 around the world of the PDF version.
Okay.
And one thing we're kind of considering at this point is that it's not just so much for people that are looking at just this technical end of record making, but music fans these days are picking it up and going, wow, I learned so much about this Solomon Burke record I love that you wrote about the producer, Joe Henry. Yeah. I learned something about how the music was created, and it was really, so it's kind of like if you look at something like Rolling Stone historically, or any of the top music magazines, Spin, whatever, and you look at those and you say, what are these articles about? They're usually more about their personalities and what led up to the new album and stuff like this. And we're opening the back door and we're saying, no. This is what it's about. This is how the record really got made.
Right. That's the stuff I get fascinated with. It was just recently the 50th anniversary, the 50th anniversaries of like the Beatles, a bunch of the Beatles albums.
Oh, the White Album,
and Sgt. Pepper, and going in and hearing how. Obviously, the band had their vision, but how it was people like you, the engineers, that saw their vision and made it actually happen. Like all the looping that had to take place. And
if you listen to, I've met a lot of the people that worked on these records, and if you listen to, especially Sgt. Pepper, like Jeff Emmerich production was kind of revolutionary at the time, getting more direct sounds and getting things to really pop, and then his recording engineering, and then George Martin's production, his arrangements and keyboards and
I know, and they were only doing it on like did they have an 8-track?
That was a 4-track record, only four channels of audio, and then they would submix it to another tape deck onto 2, and then add 2 more. And you had to really plan it out and think about it.
You have to think almost 8 or 9 steps ahead.
Oh yeah, I started on tape with Jackpot. It started as a 16-track studio, and now that almost seems laughable when people send me 72-track things to mix, and done in their computer. Yeah. But the great thing about a format like that is it makes you kind of arrange and think ahead and visualize, like, how many things do we want to put on this song? So if you think I'm going to have a string section, but it's a rock track, then you go, well, maybe the guitars shouldn't be like super full range because we need room for those strings to fit in the mix. Yeah. But if you start adding stuff on later, like kitchen sink approach, like, oh, let's just keep throwing things at it. It's
the whole thing. Just because you can, it doesn't mean you should.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's really a hard thing. That's the thing I try to teach people as an educator, as a producer, as an engineer, everything I do, and in the magazine as an editor, I try to teach them, like, you've got to have your eye on the prize. There's a way of working where you can throw everything at the wall, but then you have to do reductionist mixes, and you're not just doing a balance mix, you're turning things off and then having them come in and out, and you're building the song out of that. Yeah. Like Wilco's Yankee Hotel Foxtrot's a great example of that process. It sounds like there's at times things missing from the mix, and then they come in and it's really exciting. Right. So that's a way of doing like a reductionist mix where you're taking things out, or any of the Peter Gabriel's earlier records, there would be all these tracks going of things, and they would just be turned to mix with. The song was really determined by the mixing. They just mute things, open them up on the console, and go, this section will have these playing, Right. Then we'll turn it off, and it's really, if you put the multi-tracks up, and I've talked to the people that played on those and recorded those, if you put the multi-tracks up, just push all the 24 faders up on the tape, it sounds like a mess, but it's been sculpted in the mix process. So that's a brilliant way to work, but you have to have a lot of time, and you have to be incredibly intuitive, and then put your vision on the mix, and that's where you create the excitement. And that can totally be done. A lot of pop music these days is done that way. If you listen to really top 40 productions, they're almost all kind of done in a certain way related to that. Right. And also related to the production of hip hop and electronic music and all sorts of things that have happened in the last 30 years.
It is interesting because, granted, if you had a little 4-track or a recorder in your home, you could do some things. But now with Pro Tools and MacBooks and a few microphones, people are turning their homes into little recording studios, for good and for bad.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's ever a bad. I mean, honestly, like recording is great.
Sure,
it's always good. Whether the world needs to hear it is the question.
Right.
And, you know, I work on things sometimes, honestly. I get sent mixes from all over the world to work on it. Here's the multi-tracks. Can you mix it? And I'll always make someone happy and I'll make it sound better. But there's times, you know, like I'll solo a vocal and I'll be cleaning up the vocal edits or something and I'll be like, I don't know what this song's about. And I'm listening to just the vocal.
Yeah.
And that makes me, you know, it makes me a little sad because it's a missed opportunity to express oneself or such. And maybe there's beautiful music around it, but then there's nothing in the lyrics that really grabs you. And you're like, oh man, you spent too much time thinking about the guitar parts and not the lyrics, you know?
So it sounds as if your music fanness, I don't know how to describe it. You as a fan of music is balanced with the technical side of it so that they are in harmony with each other as opposed to canceling each other or out. Or,
I think it's really important.
Yeah.
I mean, there are very few, and even in classical recording, which is a little more like hands-off and technical in a certain way, there's very few people making great records that we like that don't look at the music with sort of a little bit of awe and wonderment, you know, and as a fan, because if you look at this stuff as the job I do sometimes of just setting up mics and setting levels and stuff, that's actually a lot of it's quite easy.
Right.
But the hard part is understanding when to change that mic out and when to coach somebody through a vocal part and when to not record and say, hey, let's run through this some more and work. You know, those are the hard parts. And so the act of recording itself is really kind of a minor part of the whole, in my opinion. And that the vision and and learning how to present things properly is massively important.
The Portland 50 podcast is presented by Jaguar Land Rover Portland. One company, two iconic brands. Jaguar Land Rover Portland is a Don Rasmussen company, the legendary Portland institution serving our community since 1950.
Talking Trash, a Green Tips podcast, is a chance for me to jump into the world of sustainability by talking to people in business, government, and nonprofits. Hi, I'm Peggy LaPointe. You can find weekly episodes every Tuesday at KINK.FM, Apple iTunes, or wherever you download podcasts.
How much work these days, not to bounce around too much, but I think it's related. How much, I know back in the day, I always used to hear like studio time is so expensive, so you got to get in there, just bang it out. So all the rehearsals are done. They just go in. Is it that way anymore, or is it a little more go in and create?
Some bands. I just did a band that we did a record on 16-track tape, mixed to 1/4-inch tape, in really like 2.5 days. Like pretty much a long EP or a short album.
Right.
Because the guys had rehearsed the stuff up. It was two guys backing up a songwriter who was their buddy. They were really adept musicians. He's a great songwriter. He doesn't need a lot of coaching on stuff. He just kind of like throws down a vocal and we all go, well, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
You know? So, you know, that was a real expedient process and it was kind of rewarding because on the other hand, I'm working on something right now that I started kind of thinking about recording in like April last year. And then I tracked 2 days of recording. And since then I've been like editing and mixing this stuff. And it's not even pop music. It's like avant-garde, but it's very specific to the scores and things have to be nudged and moved until they line up with the score for the composers to be happy. And it's like, oh man, it's a lot of work and it's really taught me something about my misconceptions going into this project. Like now I'm like, oh, I should have thought about it a different way because it just, I thought it would be very different and it's all coming together fine. But the process can be sometimes just very, very different. With the home recording thing, I mean, with people, the thing I see the worst aspects of are someone beating a poor take into the ground, trying to edit poorly played drums or trying to edit a bad vocal or just, you know, when maybe that's like, you know, I've been hired to mix something and we're just passionate, we're chopping it up and rebuilding it and all this stuff. And then by the time we're done, I'm like, if we got a drummer and a bass player in here and you just recut that right now to this template, it would be amazing. But this sounds like it's been hacked at,
right?
You know, like it's like when someone gives you a steak and it looks like someone was kind of like beating on it with knife and a hammer in the back room.
Sure.
And it's all kind of mangled.
I'm going to make this tender.
Yeah, it's like doesn't look good.
Yeah.
It's like someone chewed on it already.
Is that a result of kind of recording in a vacuum, recording in isolation, where you know again you can go in and do it all on your own. You don't have that other person to kind of say, hey, maybe you should try this or maybe don't do that.
I think so too. I think one of the things I was really lucky about early on was working on 4 albums with 2 different producers when I was in a band. And they were really good producers for what we were doing. So I learned the process, and I learned when to kind of evaluate yourself, even from seeing an outside person evaluate my takes, and keeping their eye on the prize for us. And I was like, wow, an outside opinion's amazing. It doesn't mean you always have to have one, but you can teach yourself to like change perspective.
Right.
You know, and I think a lot of times people tend to, you know, they think there's magic in a first take when there isn't, because it's new and it's fresh, and sometimes that's nice and there's some kind of slight energy about it, but other times it needs to be presented in a better way, and it's hard for them to let go of that. And other times, honestly, this is the amazing falsity of home recording goodness is I don't know how many times I've been teaching a workshop or answering an email from a reader or something. And one of the things they run into is that I go, why don't you just start over? And they go, well, the drummer's really busy and he's not available and we can't. So the unlimited time, or, you know, I can hardly record in my house because my wife's upstairs and when she walks around, it makes noises in my studio, or, you know, my kids are running around to the next room or something like that, you know, and it's like the reality, the fiction is you have unlimited time to make your record. The reality is you don't. Yeah. And if you actually, I found many clients start that way and then they go, oh man, I can't get anything done. And then they'll book like, you know, a week at my studio and it's like, they walk out with a finished mix and they go, that was amazing. Yeah. Like there's no interruptions in here. Everything's there's instruments ready to play, you know? Yeah. Everything's ready to go. Let's make a record.
As a audio engineer, as a recording engineer, and as the editor of Tape Op, it sounds as if, you know, you're 30 plus years into doing this, but you're still learning every single time. Is there anything that you could, you know, whether during a session or maybe during an interview, where as an engineer, you're like, oh, I never thought to do it that way. Are you?
Oh man. I mean, I tell people all the time, I say like, you want to learn. I never went to school for recording, like learning audio recording. And I tell them all the time, if you want to be good at something, interview the people that do it well. Yeah. Because I'll sit down and I'll be like this with you and me, and I'll be talking to someone who's made my favorite records. And if I really like those records, I can ask an interesting question and get an amazing answer. And there's definitely been times. There's been times that people will just say, they'll mention like the slightest thing, like if you're recording an upright piano, pull it away from the wall. Oh, why? It's like, well, would you play an acoustic guitar up against a wall? Like, no, that'd sound weird. It's an acoustic instrument. Oh, wow, you know? Yeah. Or someone said, you know, don't record like with a kick and snare drum in the exact center of the room. And I'm like, why? It's like, well, that's where all the frequencies, you know, because of the laws of physics.
They're all meeting in there.
They're all going to meet there. They're going to either build up or they're going to cut when they meet. So you're going to either hear too much of one frequency and too little of another or whatever. And if you move, you know, to 1/3, like this side or that side of the room, kind of lengthwise, if you go to the thirds, those actually sound better, or just kind of move it around till it sounds better. I'll go to a new studio and I'm going to make a record there. I'll pick up a floor tom and a stick, and I'll just walk around hitting the floor tom till it sounds good. And I go, that's a good place for drums. And you don't know how many times people have like, they'll be like, either they go, that's amazing because that's where all the really good engineers put the drummer. Right. Because they know. Sure. Or they go, no one's ever put drums there before, and it's a studio that has no good records coming out of it yet. Right. You know, so it's like, oh, interesting.
So it's like almost like your little special rod. You just go around tapping around. Divining rod, yeah.
Divining
rod with drums, yeah.
It's an easy trick. It costs nothing. You know, there's always a floor tom probably.
Right. I can imagine, because I think I have a fascination for this whole process, but I don't think I have the patience. Because it sounds as if that might be the biggest thing you have to have throughout the entire thing. For me, I get really antsy towards the end of a project. Like I can see it coming together, and I just want it to be done. Where a lot of times you probably have the same thing, but you realize I can see this coming together, but I might have another day. I might have another week. I might have another couple of months. Sounds
this
project you've been working on since last April.
Yeah. I mean, that's like because of digital editing and people, because people have learned, especially if I work with people that are under 30 or something at this point, they've kind of come up with like digital recording means within their own laptop as a child even.
Oh, yeah.
And so to them, everything is undoable. And I started off where you're recording on tape and mixing on a console to another tape deck, and nothing is undoable.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you have to just wipe it clean and do another pass, you know, and book more time. And so the amazing thing now is I get emails like months later going, we're just about to start mastering, but the hi-hat's too loud on the second verse. And you're like, holy Christ, okay, let me see what I can do. You know, I try to find ways to leave what I call breadcrumb trails, so I can go backwards a little bit and provide whatever clients want, because I don't want unhappy clients.
Sure.
But there's times where it's like, wow, this sort of finality of tape and everything used to make everybody just sign off and go, okay, we're good. Right. And I think that was good in a way. I don't have any desire to go back to the old days of working ever. I utilize those techniques occasionally, but I don't want things to go backwards. And I'd love some of the things I can do with a computer and a digital audio workstation, and I can work faster on some things. And there's other stuff like doing a audio book or any kind of post-production, which is just so much better to do digitally.
Sure.
I mean, I had a radio once that was like radio play from Miranda July. She's a filmmaker now and an author. And we did a record of hers where it was kind of like a long form radio play, and I did it on tape, and we'd have to just like wipe sections and re-perform them all the time to get them to have it happen at the same time, because we couldn't cut and edit because there were crossovers. And I mean, now with a digital system, you can just move everything around in seconds. We would have saved days. It was insane.
When I got into radio about 20 years ago, it was the tail end of still having carts in the studio to play the commercials on. And we would still take phone calls on tape. And so if you wanted to play back a listener, you'd have to do the you'd cut it and tape it and record your part if you had to redo it. And the instant we brought in those digital tools, it changed everything. I think in that case for the better.
Right.
For those simple things.
I mean, there's no audio quality of a phone call on tape that sounds better on tape.
Yeah. Right.
we say that all the time in the studio, like that wasn't the thing that was good about that back then.
Right.
Like the tape is.
That's why I've been curious, because we've had a couple of cassette tapes sent to us recently by record labels. And first of all, we don't have a cassette player in this building. This multi-million-dollar state-of-the-art facility does not have a cassette player in it.
Oh my God.
But I was just like, I don't think that there is I don't think people have nostalgia towards the sound of a cassette compared to the warmth that comes out of a vinyl record.
Some do. I mean, I just talked to
the warble.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm trying to restore something for a possible release right now that was recorded on cassette and mixed to another cassette. And the cassettes were really fallible. They ran at 1 7/8 inches per second, which is about as slow as you can run tape without it just taking over in tape hiss.
Right.
And they generally, most consumer units, even the best ones you could get, have a little bit of wow and flutter, like you called it warble.
Yeah,
And technically it's wow and flutter, and it's just the mechanism not playing steadily. So the pitch is shifting subtly all the time. It's kind of interesting. I mean, in a musical way, we do that with guitars and things like tremolo bars.
But you have control over that.
Yeah, we have control of that situation. I mean, and the saturation, compression, limiting of cassette tape is really unique. I mean, it really does kind of flatten things out in a levels way. You can just overload into it and then play it back, and it's got kind of an edge to it. And so I know people have used that and then dumped it into the computer, cleaned it up, and made cool stuff. And people did records like Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska, on a 4-track cassette. Guided by Voices made a bunch of records that way. But, it limits you, and it has a certain limitation of frequency response, all sorts of things. I would not want to do that. But I just talked to a friend that produced a record for someone on 4-track cassette. And it's a great songwriter, so it'll probably be a good record,
Yeah.
I mean, the problem about making records is anything can overcome anything. So like you can say, I'm going to put one mic in a room and record these guys, and you go, well, that's going to be terrible. And you go, no, they're the best jazz band in the world, and I got a $8,000 mic. And you go, oh, well, that might be pretty good, and that, as the room sounds great. Oh,
sure.
Oh, wow, okay. and the best engineer in the world is going to move the mic around till it sounds better.
In the right spot. Sure.
Okay, that'll be fine.
Yeah,
that's great. I have a friend, John Kunibert. He does a one mic series he's done some up here and he's done most of them in the Bay Area. And it's one stereo mic in a room, and they sound just beautiful.
Yeah,
it's amazing. And it's like, so yeah, that can be done. So when you look at limitations, or there's no way to say like one way is not going to work, or that there's always some caveat that another way might be great, and that's kind of the fascinating thing. That's why another reason why you can keep writing about it for this long.
Right.
There's so many things you could say. I'm going to do it all with one mic, and then I'm going to overdub around it, and like, if you're really careful, that could be kind of neat. It could be a really focused performance with little additional filigree.
It sounds as if Jackpot Recording Studio, you basically you can go there and get the full gamut of all that stuff. You've got the new digital stuff, Absolutely. But you haven't abandoned when you look at your projects. What are you? Is it a mix of all of that, or are you doing more analog still?
Man, I don't do a ton of analog. I probably personally do like 2 or 3 records a year that stay on analog, and I really. I feel like I'm a wedding planner when that comes around. I'm really careful to set it all up to succeed. Yeah, because I really have to make sure they understand what they're getting into. I've had projects in the past where they say, I want to do this all on tape, and they've never worked on tape, and then they just start throwing ideas down, and you're like, we're out. Yeah. What do you mean you're out? Use 24 tracks. Where are we going to put the vocal? Right. And that happens a lot. It's crazy. But on other sessions, the ones I've done recently, they've been very successful because we sit down, we talk about kind of the ground rules, like if a take's not happening, let's just do it again. I'm not going to cut the tape to edit one kick drum. Let's just keep going till we can get a good take. I might cut 2 takes together on the master track tape. But I have a 16-track 2-inch tape deck ready to go, a 24-track 2-inch ready to go, and a 1/4-inch 2-track for mixing down to. And a console that does 32 channels, a Rupert Neve Designs console, really elegant. And then I've got like some of the top end like converters and stuff by companies like Burl and stuff that take the audio and turn it into digital. And unbelievably, my whole studio on the digital realm is running on a Mac Mini.
Oh, wow.
That's all I
really
need. Pro Tools doesn't require that much power.
Wow.
It's amazing. So, but I have, 100 microphones and preamps and equalizers. I've just hundreds and hundreds of this analog equipment, which you need even in digital realm to get it in there, right, and have choices and to get really high quality audio when needed, or low quality maybe. Right.
So it's basically a big hybrid of all of these different pieces.
Absolutely.
That you have.
And people can come in and work totally analog, totally digital, any way they want. Yeah. People can come in and just start building loops in the box, and there's nothing being recorded. If they want to, we can run Logic, Pro Tools, Ableton Live, anything they want.
Sure. Outside of the analog to digital switch that we've seen over the past 20 or so years, what's been the other big change in the Portland music scene that you've seen since?
Oh man,
if you could name one.
Some don't change. Yeah. Dandy Warhols are out on tour right now, aren't they? That's amazing. I think when I first started, there were probably less studios. And now there's more, but it's great that there's like all sorts of studios filling different needs for different sizes or cost. There's a lot of great people in town making records, and then some of us are more expensive, like my place to a degree, and offer more features. Sure. And others are very focused on genre or just sort of more like budget underground.
Is there a camaraderie in there? Because I know what I found is that it's unique about the Portland food scene, for example. There's a lot of it's community, not competition, is which they say a lot. Does that exist in the recording studios?
No one goes to the same restaurant every night, right?
Right. and a lot of times you'll see these chefs supporting each other.
Oh yeah.
Does that exist in the recording studio field here in Portland?
Because you couldn't have like the only studio in a town. Unless you want to buy them all up or something. Right. In this field, it's very much like a service industry, and you want to offer different things. And every engineer that owns their own studio or not offers a different take on it and a different price and skill level. And I think we have a thing. We get together once a month and meet at a dive bar and people are welcome to show up. We put the word out every once in a while. And we've had meetings at my studio, and then the Recording Academy has held meetings for us to all just hang out and talk. There's a producers and engineers wing of the Recording Academy, the Grammy people, and we meet up, and so there's a lot of like ways for everyone to. And there's even a listserv that's hidden on the internet somewhere that we use to talk to each other.
Oh,
hey, this guy's
it's on the dark web.
He's kind of the dark web. It's like, hey, don't trust this client.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
we'll email each other warnings.
That happens. I see that in the food. I see that in the food industry a lot, where they've got the diner ditchers and all that stuff. We talked about Elliot Smith briefly early on, and I would love to turn back and talk a little bit about your relationship with him, because following his death it was 2003, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think it was 15 years last year.
You, and I don't know if it was automatically, but you eventually have become his catalog archivist.
Archivist, yeah. When he passed away, about 10 days later, I was supposed to go to L.A. He actually had bought me a flight, and I was supposed to go to L.A. and work with him and finish up, or try to help finish up what became From a Basement on the Hill.
Yeah.
His last posthumous record. So, the last record he was kind of working on at the time. And I didn't, obviously, because he passed away. And I didn't, my friends, Rob Schnapp, who'd produced a bunch of his records, and my friend Joanna Balme went and kind of oversaw the mixing and worked with his family to finish that record up. And I didn't get asked, and I was like, fine, it's not the same deal as what I thought was happening. And I really didn't want to be, I wanted to be involved, but I didn't want to raise my hat or jump in the fray. There's something felt really weird about that. And so I just stayed on the sidelines, and along the way, I think Kill Rock Stars or his family contacted me about doing an expanded version of Either Or, this third album, and looking for bonus tracks and stuff. And when I got the go ahead and I started doing that, I asked Elliot's father, I said, there should be an archivist, because we don't know what's in the vaults, Right. And he said, do you want the job? And I was like, oh gosh, I got to think about this. I've never done that, you know. But I ended up spearheading. I did the New Moon record before I started archiving. I went to LA and I found reels and I had them shipped up, and I listened to everything. I made rough mixes and said, here's what we could put on the bonus disc. And it was like, there's too much. Like, well, let's just make an independent release. And that became New Moon. And then I started archiving after that, transferring more reels to digital, and oversight. I would just be having, setting up like storage places with archival transfer houses and doing all this kind of coordination initially, and then got this huge RAID drive full of data and started like making rough mixes. I mean, I seriously spent a few years of time off and on just working on that, and just making sure we knew what was in the vaults. Right. I found a lot of unreleased like things, alternate takes, etc. A lot of live stuff got archived. All kinds of material. Some of it is unavailable to his family technically for use because it's under the contract he signed for his major label.
For the labels.
Yeah. But other stuff is, and a few little things have come out. Like the Heaven Adores You documentary had stuff that I mixed for the soundtrack, and lots of other little, the Either Or bonus remastered version came out a couple of years ago. Yeah. That has stuff that we found live and studio. And so there's things that can be, there's not like a missing record, right, or anything. But there's just lots of interesting little things and things that you learn from when you hear alternate versions. I
was going to say, you probably heard, if you were going through all of it or all that was available, probably the progression of him as an artist, like his songwriting, how it changed. Or even the same song a few years later that pops back up.
Always. You can even find some of the stuff he wrote in high school that pops back up near the end of his life. So that's like, wow, that's crazy. Yeah. Just the same chords or something, but he was in a band here in Portland. He went to Lincoln High School. Yeah. And he had a band called Stranger Than Fiction with some friends, and some of those, they made cassettes and they sold them to other kids at the high school. Right. And so those pop up. I've got those all in the archive, and they're out there somewhere, but not very many. Right. And, hearing anyone's high school music would be very different than hearing them 10 years later and such. So definitely you hear a progression and you hear him trying to figure out how he wants to sing, his vocal style.
Yeah.
It's at some point he kind of sounded like Joe Strummer, and he kind of sounded like Elvis Costello. And
oh, wow.
And finally you get which I got to be honest, the first time I recorded him, I thought he sounded a lot like Alex Chilton from Big Star.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I hear.
Yeah.
But I thought, oh, everyone's just going to like laugh at him because he sounds like this other singer. But I think he did a cover of 13, one of Alex's songs. And I think people just kind of understood it was something that, that made sense. It wasn't like just an imitation,
Right.
But to me, it definitely sounded similar in the way, the approach and such.
Is that a project that I'm assuming? I mean, that music's not infinite. So is that pretty much wrapped up? Have you sorted through everything that's probably available, or do things still pop up every now and then?
I've got some work to do. I got about 3 years of things I've set aside, and some of them are just releases that need to be cataloged back into the archive, and just some data backups and certain things like that. And there's still missing reels that. I know there's a missing reel like for his second solo record.
Somewhere out there.
Because the songs aren't available anywhere in our archive except, as multi-tracks. And I'm like, oh, man, I wonder. And they used to be stored at Jackpot, and I always think, God, did someone just run off with one?
Right.
I mean, it could have happened. I don't have any inclination, any idea that it did, but what if? And that makes me feel awful.
As an archivist, is there a protocol you have? Is there like a set things that you should be doing? Because I'm fascinated by this, because it's not necessarily something I think as people set out as musicians that they're thinking about. They should be archiving a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, my whole life is me stumbling into I never learned an instrument and I ended up as a bass player. I never learned how to edit a magazine. I ended up as an editor.
Yeah.
I never learned how to record. I ended up recording. So my take on archiving was just I had a little bit of advice from the guy who was doing the main transfers, and he set up a file maker system. Mm-hmm. And so I used that to be able to search stuff. And I haven't learned it that well. I actually have a guy that I might have pay to teach me more. Right. But, I got the data in there, and that's but the main thing you're doing is you're trying to make sure that anything out there is especially with analog. This is the hard thing. Analog tape, if you get a better tape deck, a better quality tape deck with better tape heads and electronics, you can get more off that tape. Sure. It's not a finite thing like the way digital audio is. It's finite. If you take a digital audio tape and you transfer it, you've got it. That's all there was.
Zeros and ones just went from there to there.
Unless it's messing up somehow, So with the audio, when I made the New Moon record, I was transferring the same reels that we transferred again later with better equipment, and I was like, oh man, it could have sounded a little better, and that was a real heartbreak, for me. Because it's just, the more information you hear, sometimes the more real things sound, the audio clarity and stuff. So the main thing you're trying to do with the archiving is to get the best transfers possible, and then basically catalog them. And if there's a song that you can't, you listen to the raw tracks for a song, and you go, oh, that sounds like the one on this record, and you listen in A, B, and make sure, and then maybe you go, oh, but there's a track that he didn't use in the mix of alternate vocals. Make a note of that, make a rough mix, go to the next song. Okay, when does this start? And then you go, is this song on a record? Maybe it wasn't. So then you make a rough mix of it. And then maybe there's two sets of vocals and they're different, so you print both of those, make notes of that. Yeah. Go to the next song.
It's back to this patience thing. So it's time consuming, it's tedious, but there's a reason for it.
Yeah, I never really answered the patience question too earlier. I mean, it really is something you have to take yourself out of the equation.
Yeah. What you have coming up at 5:30 doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I find that I won't even tell clients if I'm going to a show that night or something, if pretty much hoping we'll stop at 8. Yeah. Right. And I try to take myself out of the equation. If I'm hungry and I'm sitting there, I just don't say anything. Yeah. Or I'll have a bag of peanuts in my locker at the studio. Right. I mean, you have to take yourself out. It's more that they're the most important people in the room. Yeah. And you have to be supportive and just and sometimes just wait for things. I have some sessions that are very slow relatively, and I have to be ready for that. Just sit around, drink coffee, and talk for an hour and a half before we even track something. Mm-hmm. If that's what they want, then I do that. Right. I don't have to say get going. Other times I have to corral people because I know they have limited time. So but patience is, it's hard to learn. It was hard for me early on to get into recording people, especially if I wasn't 100% into their music. And I was spoiled because I was getting Elliott Smith and Quasi and Satan's Pilgrims and all these really fun bands that I enjoyed in Portland early on. And then I would do some other session that just called out of the blue.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, I'm recording some of Portland's best music, and then I'm recording a fake grunge band, for instance.
Right.
You know, like kind of, you know, okay, kind of every other word was babe, rawr, you know, or something like, what is this? You know, I wouldn't really necessarily like it. The guys might be really nice. You know, I'd try to be friendly and have a good time, but I didn't put much into it back then. I would just kind of record it and try to make it sound good. And now if you sent me something even like that, I would probably put more into it now. I've learned to kind of sublimate my own ego and and expectations and just say, like, what can I do to make this better for them? And be a little more positive. Just it gives you a more positive vibe on the outside of you that'll encourage them to perform better and stuff. So it's a little zen or something. I don't know what it is, but it helps.
Put that in tape op.
I've written about that.
Okay.
See?
All right. Well, speaking of time, I've had you for about the amount of time I told you I would take. I really appreciate coming in. We could do another hour. We should do a part 2 sometime.
I can easily talk about myself for a long time.
All right. Thanks, Larry.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening today. And in case you've missed any previous podcast, be sure to check out KINK.FM or download an episode wherever you listen to podcasts. And while you're at it, be sure to like and subscribe. The Portland 50 is a podcast about the people who dream, build, and champion the uniqueness of Portland, creating a better community for generations to come. It's presented weekly by Jaguar Land Rover Portland. One company, 2 iconic brands. Jaguar Land Rover Portland is a Don Rasmussen company, the legendary Portland institution serving our community since 1950.